Hello everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to Standard Platform section. My name is Chanalong Kityamanya, and
แต่อืม
and
My name is ทิชานันท์วงศ์สิริธร
this is my guest honor to be the MC of this section. And first of all, I would like to inform the audience of the section schedule. And so we will start by bring you participants to listen the introduction of our leagues by Dr. Rudy Willing, who is executive committee. And then the rules and regulations will be presented by Mr. Arne Hasselbing, who is one of organizing committee. And the final part, Dr. Rudy and Mr. Arne will share the experience for technical talks. And okay, let's start. Please welcome Dr. Rudy to present.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Just give me a moment here to share a screen.
Okay,
I hope that I'm sharing the correct screen. So, yeah, you can see the slide, I think, just.
Okay, I see.
Yes.
Okay. So, thank you again for the introduction. And my name is Rudy Willing, and I am a member of the SPL Executive Committee. And I'm going to be talking about generally the Standard Platform League and giving an introduction to the league. Some of the people on this call will be very familiar with the league and have participated in the league. Some of the people may not have, and I'm hoping to address both of these audiences. So for the outline of the talk, I'm going to talk about generally the overview of the league, trying to place the league within the context of RoboCupSoccer. So how do the objectives and goals of the SPL contribute to the overall goals of RoboCup and RoboCupSoccer in particular? We'll have a look back at the history of the rules development so that for people who are just joining the league now or who have only joined recently, that you can see something of how the league has developed over a number of years. We'll talk a little bit about the league output and resources, resources that are available for teams to start or to develop new technologies, the roadmap for our developments going forward, and some information about participation and contact with the league. So in the Standard Platform League, one of the key features is that all of the teams compete using identical robot hardware. And you can see a picture of this here on the right-hand side. It's the SoftBank Now. In fact, it's featured prominently on almost every photograph for every RoboCup event because it's a very popular robot. It's a very appealing robot with the general public. It has an attractive humanoid appearance, and it's not intimidating because it's only about 60 centimeters tall, the size of a very small child. The robot's a reasonable size for storage and transport as well, and reasonably priced, so that it is, at least for qualified teams. So it's practical for the SPL to play with teams of 5 robots each. It's not a big problem to have a reasonable number of robots. As you know, with other leagues, it becomes more problematic if the robots are large. Amongst the RoboCupSoccer leagues, we have the humanoid Standard Platform League, SPL, and 3D simulation leagues, which are all based on legged robots. And then we have the small size and mid-size leagues, which are based on wheeled robots. And all of these physical robot leagues vary in their hardware and computational power. The simulation leagues obviously have more flexibility with regard to their computation. Because the Standard Platform League uses a standard platform, standard hardware, the focus of the teams is on development of algorithms that run effectively within the constraints of the platform. And that means that the SPL has always been an ideal environment for developments in artificial intelligence, in cooperative behavior, and multi-agent systems using physical robots, where the sensor data is incomplete and noisy, and the true actuations of the robot do not always match precisely what was requested for a variety of reasons. And this is the reason why I've shown the standard platform positioned between the Humanoid League and the Simulation League. So we don't do the hardware work that the Humanoid League does, and we are not as completely software oriented as the Simulation League. And in fact, we sit somehow between these two extremes. And we get the benefits of working with larger team sizes than the Humanoid League, and probably a little bit more of a focus on the software, but still in the physical world. In terms of RoboCup overall, where does the SPL, the Standard Platform League, fit into the objectives? So for the 2050 Grand Challenge, we know that the target is to develop a humanoid robot soccer team which can play against and beat the human world champion team, which we assume would be the FIFA World Cup team. Along the path to this goal, of course, there must be interim goals. So what might the interim goal be? Well, it would be to develop a robot soccer team that at least plays like human players. In general, it's important that we keep the public engaged through the process to this goal because it's going to take a long time. So during that time, the appeal and the excitement associated with RoboCup must be maintained. We cannot allow it to become boring. And at the same time, it's a vehicle that we use to promote robotics and AI research with the general public so that they remain in favor of or supportive of investment in this area. The landmark challenge itself must have a high level of attainment so that achieving it represents a landmark in the history of mankind. And I think that'll certainly be the case for RoboCupSoccer. But in fact, the goal itself isn't necessarily the core thing. The goal is set high so that we must have a series of technical breakthroughs in order to accomplish the goal. And these technical breakthroughs should result in developing technologies and techniques that have impact outside of the RoboCup environment. So even though we develop for robot soccer, the impact of our work can be much more widely felt, and some of these techniques can form the foundation of the next generation of businesses and industries. As we mentioned, it's important that the SPL and RoboCup in general maintains public engagement that is appealing, that it helps to promote research in robotics and AI, and that it contributes to the 2050 goal. And the way in which we try to contribute to the 2050 goal is by advancing the capabilities of our humanoid robot soccer players towards more realistic games, and where we feature measurably increasing capabilities, both for cooperative capabilities of the team and individual capabilities of the robots. We need to contribute to the scientific and technology developments that also have application outside the field of robot soccer. So in what areas is the SPL capable of uniquely contributing, or does it uniquely contribute? I would say that these areas are in the area of artificial intelligence, multi-agent systems in the real world, humanoid robotics, of course, and a particular contribution of SPL and RoboCup itself is that we work with integrated robot systems. We don't work with just part of a robot system. We don't work with just a single algorithm, but in fact, we work with integrated systems, and these systems are autonomous. They operate on their own without any remote control. And this is very important because in many research demonstrations that you would find online or in top-level conferences, people are focused very much on just one technique or one aspect of the robot. But in fact, this integration of all the pieces is challenging in its own right, getting to work correctly together. And it's something that doesn't maybe get enough attention, but is of course necessary for us to move robots out of the laboratory and into the real world. There are some unique challenges with the the Standard Platform League. And some of these are a result of the platform itself. So we know that it is using the SoftBank Now robot, that all teams must use this robot, and none of the teams are permitted to modify the hardware of the robot in any way. So we're not allowed to modify the computation power of this robot. We're not allowed to modify the motor drivers, etc. So this places equal constraints on all teams. And some of these constraints have quite practical application or limitations for all of the teams. So we have the field of view of the robot from the cameras is rather narrow. So unlike in some of the other leagues where you can maybe see the entire field or a large portion of the field at once, in the SPL you're limited to quite a narrow field of view. This entails the robots then looking around quite a lot, and it also requires us to build models of the environment which can integrate that information that's gathered in a temporal manner over time. Because it's a humanoid robot platform, the camera platform moves from side to side like this, and that results in a kind of significant motion blur, which would not be present to the same extent in wheeled robots. And is something, again, that we need to work around. Because the robots are rather small and rather low to the ground, far away features are difficult to see. So even on the current size of the field, which has a 6x9 meter playing area, it's not really possible for a robot on one side of the field to see a feature like a field line on the other side of the field. And this requires us currently to deal with sparse information for localizing the robot. But if the field size were to increase further, it would become even more challenging. And then, of course, there's the computational power of the robot. So the robot is powered by an Atom processor primarily. The current V6 robot is certainly more powerful than previous generations, but it is still, as all systems based on batteries normally are, it is still limited in its computational power. And this means that, for example, quite often state-of-the-art algorithms that are reported in the literature, which have been designed and tested to run on, for example, NVIDIA 1080 Ti GPU cards, will not run on something like a Now platform. So there, quite a bit of the research task involved in the perception area is in taking maybe either simple approaches and making them sophisticated enough to operate in the RoboCup environment, or taking state-of-the-art approaches and trying to simplify them or make them run more efficiently for this RoboCup. In the area of rules and gameplay, we're currently working with teams of 5x5, 5 versus 5, although Arna will mention that we are looking at 7 versus 7 in the new rules. And with these numbers, we have the opportunity to develop real team play, to develop real tactics, and to work out how the robots should move in space, as opposed to a very simple behavior, which might be just the nearest robot goes to the ball and the nearest robot kicks the ball, which is where we would have started probably 10 or 11 years ago. And one of the limitations that we also work with is that the team coordination itself is constrained by limited wireless communication. And that's by design, and we'll speak about that a little bit when we talk about the roadmap. So now I want to talk a little bit about the development of the league since 2009. So 2009 is when we switched over from the four-legged league to the standard platform league as we know it now, using the Now robots. So the original playing area was 6x4 meters with yellow and blue goals and a small red ball. This meant that the perception task was much simpler for the robots back then, because they could use color blob detection essentially to identify key landmarks on the pitch and to identify the ball itself. And the teams were just 3 players per team initially, with the players identified by either blue or red waistbands. Already in that first year, there was a passing challenge. And I mention this because the passing challenge is something that has arisen numerous times during the history of RoboCup. 2011, we increased to 4 players per team. 2012, we switched one of the goals to yellow so that now both goals are yellow. This means that now the pitch is symmetrical and it is not possible for robots to detect which side of the pitch they are on based on the goals alone. In 2013, there was quite a dramatic change. The playing area was increased to 9 meters by 6 meters, and the size of the team was increased to 5 players per team. And in fact, it has remained at 5 players per team since 2013. Fields in the RoboCup environment were also now no longer separated by barriers, and so that increased the challenge also on the perception task for the robots. They needed to ensure that they detect the boundary of the field and recognized it as their own field. In 2013 was also when we first introduced the drop-in player challenge, which became a competition in subsequent years. The drop-in player challenge, for those of you who don't know about it, if you joined afterwards, was a challenge in which teams supplied a single robot to a team that had never played before together. So there was no official coordination in advance of behavior. What there was a standard packet that was used to exchange common information between the robots, and based on that common information shared between the robots and the position of the robots, the position of the ball, robots were supposed to make in some way sensible decisions. So that was quite an interesting AI task. 2014 introduced the coaching robot. This was something that existed for a few years, but was never exploited to the extent that we would have wished, I think. And 2014 is also when the Wi-Fi was first limited to 5 standard packets per second, which is relevant as we move into the modern era. 2015, the goals were changed to white. So now all of the features on the field are white. So the lines are white, the goals are white. We have custom jersey designs at this point as well. So in general, the environment is getting more complicated for the robots to work with. On the challenges side, you can see that there was development of corner kicks, starting to explore different carpets, and exploring a realistic ball, which first appeared then in 2016. So in 2016, we switched over to the new black and white ball, which was more realistic and looked like a normal soccer ball. And we first tried the outdoor competition at this point. So that derived from the work that had been done on the many carpets. So the outdoor competition used artificial grass, and it used an outdoor environment. Well, not strictly outdoor, but certainly an environment which had a lot of direct sunlight, which made for a very challenging perception task. Particularly the robots at the time had less sophisticated cameras than the current generation. In 2017, the artificial grass became standard in the main competition, and the competition was split for the first time into the Champions Cup and Challenge Shield. So the purpose of this was to allow for the Challenge Shield teams, which are the less well-performing teams, to have a competition in which they wouldn't necessarily be beaten in every game, and they have a chance to make progress with teams of a similar standard, while in the Champions Cup, they also have a chance to play with teams of similar standard, and so the games become more competitive for everyone. There's also an addition of a mixed team, and this took maybe some of the ideas of the drop-in challenge, simplified it so that it was just 2 teams instead of 5 different players on a team. And because it was coordinated in advance, it allows the mixed teams to coordinate their behaviors a little bit more. And so it made for some good matches, but few teams in general participated in this. In 2018, we reduced the Wi-Fi limits to 3 SPL packets per second. And you will see that this is a general trend where we reduce the amount of communication that the robots can do over Wi-Fi. In 2019, it was reduced to 1 SPL packet per player per second. And you can see various other details about it. 2020, unfortunately, the event was cancelled. And then in 2021, we had a remote event which just featured challenges, but some of the challenges were quite interesting. And particularly, I made note of the autonomous calibration challenge. In general, the league progress we believe is good, but there has been a lack of good metrics, and it's something we're working to address. What we can observe in the most recent physical competitions from 2017 to 2019 is that the goals per minute has generally increased, and you can see that the Champions Cup team, the higher competition, produces more goals per minute than the Challenge Shield teams. This is affected by things like how well teams defend, of course, but we assume that all else being equal, more goals equals a better standard of play. The penalties per game has also reduced for the Champions Cup teams, which is what we would hope to see. So as they get better at avoiding penalties. This is typically for things like pushing or leaving the field, etc. Unfortunately, the Challenge Shield teams, the lower performing teams, we see that there's an increase in the penalty count. And that actually motivates one of the changes that we make to the rules this year. So Challenge Shield teams were finding the competition more difficult. They were finding it more difficult to keep up. In the Standard Platform League, since 2008, 2009, we have about 148 peer-reviewed publications. I think Peter mentioned earlier in his opening address that there have been 200 odd publications plus from the Standard Platform League. That probably includes the four-legged league before us. There have been 15 data sets released, and these are published on the SPL website. And there are 7 fairly complete code bases also linked from the SPL website. So for a team that wishes to start out or that wishes to see how other teams have done things, these code bases provide useful results. The general research direction that we have for the league is towards increased deep learning and edge AI research output. There has also been some work on reinforcement learning and behavior, and the now V6 platform has definitely helped a lot in terms of its computational capability. The increase in deep learning and data-driven techniques matches the general pattern in robotics fields. And I would note that the advances that we make in the SPL would often transfer most directly to the embedded and edge AI fields. So briefly then, to wrap up over the next few slides, the roadmap to 2050, we want to increase to teams of 11 versus 11, to increase to a full-size soccer pitch. We want realistic team behaviors and player skills. We want to manage the unfair advantage that robots may have over human players and make sure that we make measurable progress towards the goal. So let's talk about this for a second. Some of these things are outside the scope of the current SPL, or at least with the current hardware. So a full-size soccer field would not be practical, I think, with the current SPL. We can certainly move towards more realistic behaviors. We can potentially explore teams of up to 11 versus 11 on a smaller pitch. Unfair advantage that I refer to is that, of course, there would be many ways for a robot team to beat a human soccer team. One of the ways would be to have robots that are scary or dangerous, in which case human players would be afraid to take the ball from them, or if the robots were much stronger, much faster. So in order for this to be fair in any sense, the robot capabilities have to somehow match the human capabilities. And one of the areas that we look at in the SPL is the communication area. So typically robots communicate using Wi-Fi, and this would allow them theoretically to have full knowledge of every position on the pitch that all of the robots can see. But of course, a human player has nothing resembling this amount of information to work with. I think this is an unfair advantage, and we are working to develop robots that can play under the same sort of constraints that humans play. So they can only work with the information they see themselves and what they can model or predict of their teammates' behavior. So this is an important area for us. Over the next 3 to 5 years, what we're doing in the SPL then is we're limiting the Wi-Fi communication, adding more natural audio-visual communication to allow for this incomplete knowledge of the world and the team. We want to make the rules more realistic and match the FIFA rules where possible, so you'll see gradual change in the rules along these lines. We're adding technical challenges to develop more dynamic ball and behavior skills. So this is to make the robots generally more skillful and to make them cooperate more. This is particularly important as we move to larger team sizes. We are hoping to increase the team size. We're exploring initial work with 7 versus 7 teams this year. And we will keep the field size the same, because putting more robots on the same size field results in more touches, it's less space for the robots to work with, and it requires better skills and more passing. In the future, we may increase to 9 versus 9 and 11 versus 11. We're looking at video statistics so that we can measure the progress of the league, and the rules should also look at differentiating between the Champions Cup and Challenge Shield going forward. In recent years, we've qualified up to 24 teams, 12 in the Champions Cup and 12 in the Challenge Shield. At our last physical event in 2019, we initially qualified 5 teams from Asia, 2 from Australia, 11 from Europe, 4 from North America, and 4 from South America. The numbers in brackets afterwards represent teams that dropped out subsequently. So we have just under 24 in the end. So we didn't have much participation of teams from Asia in the 2021 remote RoboCup, but we'd like to see that increase again in 2022. So we hope for good participation from Asia. Just for any new teams who are thinking of applying, in the qualification procedure, we often end up with some waitlisted teams that are not initially qualified, but it is often the case that some other qualified team will drop out, and so quite often waitlisted teams do get the chance to participate. So even if you're waitlisted, you should be encouraged that you will have a chance to participate. To contact the league in general, we recommend looking at the website, and particularly for new teams, we recommend looking at the joining RoboCup link. To stay up to date with announcements, register for the RoboCup Now mailing list. All announcements for the general SPL teams go to this list. Once we have qualified teams from RoboCup, a dedicated mailing list is kept for the qualified teams, which get RoboCup specific updates for this particular event, but general updates go to the RoboCup Now list. And you can reach us at the SPL technical committee or organizing committee lists. So at that point, I will say thank you for your attention, and I will hand back to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ludwig, for the introduction of our league. The next agenda is the rule and regulation, which is delivered by our technical committee. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Arne Hanselbring.
Sorry, Mr. Anne, you unmute, please.
Now?
Okay, I hear you. Okay.
Thanks. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'm presenting the rules, but in our league, the technical committee is responsible for the rules. This is not my own work, so I'm just presenting for them here because they can't be here. And the other thing about the rule changes is that this is a summary of everything since 2019, because since then basically no real games have been played using new rules, although they had already been intended for RoboCup 2020, because we had a different format in 2021. So to group the changes into a few areas, as Rudi already introduced, there is the first area is communication. This is also new for really a new change for this year. Then changes that were for 2020 are about the field layout, introducing a penalty kick during the game, adding a rule for indirect kicks from set plays, differentiating the rules between Champions Cup and Challenge Shield, and then of course we have new specific technical challenges for this RoboCup. So the first rule change is about communication, and so since 2014, as Rudy said, there is a standardized way, packet of communicating in the SPL, which is broadcast, and it used to be a number of messages per second per player. So in the last year, every player was allowed to send a message every second. But this is, of course, unrealistic, as humans don't just send all of their knowledge to all of their teammates at that interval. And the path to a more realistic ways of communication is to first limit the messages per game and per team. So every team has a fixed budget of messages that they can send per game, but they can choose themselves when they want to send them. And the amount of messages they can send corresponds about to a fifth of what they could previously send during a game when they sent once per second. So now the robots have to decide when they want to communicate some information, or when they think that they have valuable information for their teammates. And the messages are counted by the game controller application, and when you exceed your budget, then your score is 0. So when a team sends too many messages, they can at most tie their game, but they cannot win anymore. Then the next change is about the layout of the field, and especially the penalty and the goal area. So we used to have only a penalty area, which was basically more like a goal area, which was the area where, for example, the goalkeeper is allowed to pick up the ball with its hands. And we introduced new penalty and goal area. So the penalty area is now actually at scale 1 to 10, and it contains the penalty mark. And where the penalty area was, there is now the goal area. And we used to have restrictions on the amount of robots in the goal area in order to avoid blocking the goals by too many robots. This has now changed to 3 players per penalty area per team. So there can be 3 attackers and 3 defenders in the penalty area, but not more. But the goalkeeper is still only allowed to do its special things in the goal area. So, for example, touching the ball with its hands, and for example, it is allowed to be a bit more rough in its own goal area when it goes to the ball. So this is still only the case in the goal area, not in the extended penalty area. Then one of the main uses of the penalty area is the penalty kick. So since the introduction of free kicks in recent years, it was one of the strange things that you could have a penalty kick in 10, maybe half a meter from your goal line away, and that wasn't very realistic. So by introducing the penalty area, we can now have a penalty kick when a foul happens in the penalty area. And the procedure is a bit different than other free kicks because there's a setup phase. And in these first 30 seconds after the referee announces the penalty kick, the robots must move to their legal position, and it is only legal for the goalkeeper of the defending team and one robot of the attacking team to be in the penalty area, and all other robots must leave the penalty area. And the goalkeeper must also stand on the goal line. Then the ball is placed on the penalty mark, and after the referee whistles, the taker can take some time to kick towards the goal or in any way touch the ball. And it is only allowed to do this once, so it may not dribble, for example. And once it has touched the ball, the other players may also enter the penalty area and the play continues as normal. Or if a goal is scored, then of course the goal counts. If it does not violate other rules. And also, as in real soccer, the goalkeeper must not, so even after the whistle, the goalkeeper may not immediately dive, but it must wait for the kicker to actually kick. So this is the new penalty kick. Then we have the indirect kick rule. So we used to have a rule that you cannot score goals directly from kickoff before the ball left the center circle. And this has now been extended for every kind of set play, except for the penalty kick. The ball has to be played a second time deliberately within or outside. It has to leave control of a player, so that you can't just so similar to as you can't just score a goal from kickoff. You can neither just dribble the ball into the goal. So in fact, in real soccer, you can score goals from kickoff, but in the SPL, this led to a few cases where it is too easy to score. So that's the main reason. And then, of course, for other set plays, indirect kicks are something that happens in real soccer. But in our league now, all the set plays have to be indirect. So there's no distinction between indirect free kick and direct free kick. That would probably increase the stress on the referee to make correct decisions if both were there. And if a goal occurs that does not result from an indirect kick, then the effect is a goal kick for the defending team. So this is the indirect kick rule. Then we come to the challenge shield. So as Rudi said, there are two subdivisions of the league, which have the purpose of letting teams play against other teams of similar capabilities. So generally in the challenge shield, there are teams that are either new or perhaps have a high student turnover or something like this. So they shouldn't be overwhelmed by the complexity of all the of the complete rules as the Champions Cup. One of the items that is different for the challenge shield is that they have shorter penalty times. So as you could see in Rudi's statistics, the penalties per game in the challenge shield are relatively high. and the penalties are timed. So each time there is a penalty, a robot must leave the field for some time. So with that amount of penalties per game, there often would be very few robots left, and that is undesirable if you want to see actual playing happen. In fact, the penalty times normally increase per penalty per team, so that the second and third and fourth penalty each add up to the time the robot has to stay out. And this does not happen in the challenge shield anymore, in order to increase the number of robots that are actually playing. Then the challenge shield has a simpler free kick procedure, because in the Champions Cup, a free kick immediately proceeds after it has been called. So robots tend to be confused where the ball is when it gets replaced and so on. And in the challenge shield, they have a setup phase now where the robots have time to position themselves for the adjusted situation. And then the other differences are that in the challenge shield, you are allowed to pick up robots for any reason, as long as the robot is not really actively involved in the play. So you can, when there is a software defect, you can also request a robot to be given to you and reboot it or change the software or something like that, which you are normally not allowed during gameplay, but only during stoppages of play. You can request the robots to be placed for a kickoff. So if your robots don't position very well for a kickoff, then you can ask the referee to reset all the robots to positions, to known positions, which are not optimal, but which still allow the team to start from a known point, which can be helpful. Then there are some more minor changes, like goals are now also announced using a whistle. So as the start of each half or after a goal is signaled with a whistle and the wireless signal is delayed by 15 seconds, this is now also the case for a goal. So if robots don't hear that whistle, they have 15 seconds less to reach their position for kickoff. Then the so-called button interface has mostly been removed, which was a fallback if there was no working wireless. But this has mainly become useless since many of the new states, such as free kicks, aren't reasonably settable using the button interface. So now the league says there must be working Wi-Fi or the game cannot take place. The initial kickoff has been standardized, so robots walk in from specified positions and the team does not have as much freedom to position their robots as they used to have. And this is in part an artifact from the fact that we expect more remote competitions to happen, and this simplifies the robot handling for the assistants. And now during a kickoff, as long as the ball has not been played by the kicker, the robots are not allowed to enter the opponent halves. So they must stay inside their own half as long as the ball has not been played. And then there are many more details that you could that you would find if you read the whole thing. So now I come to the technical challenges. There are 4 technical challenges this year. The first one is the 7 versus 7 competition, which is basically, as Rudi said, just a normal game with but with 7 players, so on a regular field. One interesting aspect is that in order to have 7 robots per team, we establish a shared robot pool to which teams that participate in this competition have to contribute some robots. And so of the 7 robots that a team plays with, 3 are randomly assigned from this pool and within a short time before the game. So they have to, for example, calibrate those robots quickly before the game. So this is something that has been enabled by last year's competitions, which were focused on calibration and using teams using robots of other teams. Then there is the dynamic ball handling challenge. The goal of this is to improve the passing skills, but in a dynamic situation. So as Rudi said, there have been passing challenges a lot in the history of the SPL and also last year, but those were mostly in a static setting and not without, especially not with moving opponents. And in this challenge, the ball should be, so one team of 3 robots should score a goal with 2 passes, and the defenders are actually active according to some predefined rules. And they must not get possession of the ball or even touch the ball. And the teams are ranked based on how quick they are able to do this. So to score a goal after 2 passes. Third challenge is the visual referee challenge, which aims at replacing the wireless for the game controller, so that the robots do not have to figure out the robots have to figure out the game state themselves, and they do not have ground truth information. And in this challenge, there is a single robot which observes a referee that stands at the side of the field and whistles and then gestures one of 12 signals. You can see some of them here. And the robots have to detect this and say which signal they saw, and then based on whether they are correct or not, they get points. And last challenge is the open research challenge about video statistics and video analysis, which is about extracting data from a camera that is put on the side of the field. And there are many applications for this, for example, statistics, but also refereeing if it can be done live, or getting ground truth data. And first of the step of the challenge is, so the challenge actually already started. The teams label data to establish a common data set, which will be available next month. And then at RoboCup, teams will present their ideas and software that they have created for this challenge, and the results are released, and then we hope to establish some infrastructure for example, for statistics that we can generally use. So in summary, we have for the overall rule changes less communication, but now as a deliberate act of the robots, there are advances in the field layout. So now we are only missing the penalty arcs and I think the corner arcs or something like that. We have many more elements of real soccer, like the penalty kick and indirect kicks, and an adjusted kickoff rule, and the challenge shield rules aim to improve the quality of games for entry-level teams. And then we have technical challenges that promote team play, understanding the referee, and generating data from or extracting information from all the data that we get. So that was the rulebook update from my side. So I think I hand back to Rudi.
So, thank you, Mr. Arne Hasselbing, for the suggestion. So now we'll move to the next part. The final part is the technical talk. In this part, Dr. Ludi Willing and Mr. Arne Hasselbing will be share their experience to us. So I would like to invite Dr. Ludi Willing and Mr. Arne Hasselbing for the discussion on the topic of technical talk.
Thank you again. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, so I hope that you can see everything here again. We will keep this short because I know that we are reaching the end of our session time. So we want to talk a little bit about the code use and contribution requirements for the Standard Platform League. So this is something that is mentioned in the rule book, but is something that we find teams find a little bit confusing. So we want to explain this a little bit. So just a quick reminder of what we want to achieve in SPL. We want to have appealing games that engage the public. We want to have realistic games, but we want to see measurably increasing capabilities of the robots and the teams, and we want to see some applications beyond RoboCupSoccer. So what this means is that it is not good enough to play attractive games alone or to be entertaining. It is not good enough to simply come to RoboCup and be able to play soccer, particularly if your ability to play soccer has been based on an open source code. Instead, we need to see contributions from all teams in the league, helping to improve the general standard of the league. We fully encourage reusing code. A number of teams have provided complete, documented open source code bases for the Standard Platform League. This is very helpful for a new team to get started quickly, and it's very helpful for an existing team to see other approaches to a similar problem. But there are still challenges with this. For example, even with an open source code base that is documented, there is always some undocumented know-how that hasn't been captured. There might be some features that are not well documented or documented at all. The code bases are now quite complex and big because the rules and the league has been around for such a long time that it has developed quite far. And often the motivation for certain design decisions has been lost. So why is something done the way that it is not clear. And this matters when you're trying to change things. The existence of these open source code bases can lead to a misunderstanding by teams about what they must do to participate. The misunderstanding is really the difference between just getting the code and getting soccer working versus making a contribution to the league. So what is the purpose of this sharing and this open source code? It's so that every team does not need to reinvent the wheel, does not need to start from the beginning, but can focus their energy on some unique contribution to the league. Every team has a duty to do this. So what do we consider to be a contribution? It's a novel, research publishable contribution within the soccer software itself. I'll talk about research publishable in a moment. It's in the soccer software itself, what's running during game time. So it is not in the tools. That's insufficient. It's mandatory for the team software to use this novel contribution if it is being claimed. So if you claim that ball detection is your novel contribution, then you must use your own ball detection during the game. You cannot decide that, well, actually my novel ball detection wasn't that good, so I'll use another one instead. And the contribution rule actually applies to both established teams and to new teams. So even if you are a team that has been around for a long time, it is a requirement that you make at least one novel contribution of this nature in the last 3 years. If it is more than 3 years since your last contribution, you must make a new one. So what is research publishable? That it is published in research in a conference or a journal is clearly research publishable. But it doesn't have to be published. If it's not published, maybe some engineering works or some software engineering works are not suitable for publication. Maybe there's insufficient scientific or theoretical novelty to them. But in that case, they must be equivalent in the scale, challenge, complexity, and in their quality to research publishable work. So it cannot be a small thing, it must still be a significant piece of work. Things that are generally not sufficient would be parameter tuning or optimization, minor enhancements to modules, and purely if the effect on the overall performance is small. So where should you contribute? For the Rulebook 2022, there are 9 different areas that have been identified as game critical modules that are recognized by default. So if you make significant contributions in these areas, that would be a recognized contribution. One of the ones that I would draw attention to is the behavior. It says here behavior architecture and not behavior itself. So for example, the rulebook specifically says that handwritten behaviors or just writing behaviors in general is not considered to be a contribution. It is very necessary for playing soccer, but it's not a contribution at the level that we're looking for because it does not transfer very well between teams. Also not considered sufficiently game critical at the moment are natural language detection and robot and game controller communication. If you have a contribution that is not in one of the areas listed above that you think is still novel and is a valuable contribution, then you can ask the TC for recognition of it. And in many cases, I think that would be looked on favorably, provided that it is of sufficient scale and quality. So outside of the 9 critical module areas that we identified, what other ideas might you have for contribution? For that, I would refer you back to the roadmap and say that within the area of limiting the Wi-Fi communication, which is on the roadmap, there would be implications for how we perceive the world, how far away we can perceive our robot teammates in opposition, modeling of the world and modeling of what teammates will do, and alternate communication schemes, audio-visual communication perhaps between robots. In the path to making the rules more realistic, we don't look at handwritten behaviors, but maybe you can consider new behavior architectures, new behavior engines, or a new approach to developing and learning behaviors. And finally, in dynamic and ball behavior skills, you could look at perception or prediction of the ball position versus time, motion support for more dynamic control of the ball while the ball is moving, etc. Things that are not done currently by most all of the teams within RoboCup SPL. And so these are areas for development. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Arne. Do you want me to leave the slide up, Arne?
Okay, yes, please. So maybe if we still have time, I'll comment a bit about this from the perspective of one of the available code releases from the human. So there are many other code releases that are sufficiently complete to deploy to a robot and yeah, then build your own algorithms on that. And so so one of them is Be Human. We already released our software from 2021. And this, for example, has new capabilities for automatic calibration, which means that you tend to have less knowledge of the system to get it running And we also included more of the basic behaviors. That means that it is still necessary for the human code release to write custom behaviors on top of that, because the code release especially does not have any team behavior. And it can, so the read behavior does nothing more than walking to the ball and kick it towards the goal. So yes, but it offers, it is rather modular from the software side, which does not mean that it is not required to understand more than the thing you are working on, because, for example, replacing the control of the head means that the robot will see different things, and that, of course, affects then how the model of the environment is. One of the things that would probably be really good to implement on top of the Human code release are learned behaviors, because in fact that's something that Human itself does not really work on. So there is probably very much potential for improvement, because the basics are mostly there. But of course, all the other things are also like the dynamic ball handling skills is somehow underdeveloped, I would call, because we still can't, for example, kick balls at arbitrary distances, which is a bit required for successful passing. So this is also an important area to work on, or something that you could do with the Human code release that would have an impact and yeah, be really visible. Of course, if you work on computer vision, then you less see the impact of what you're doing, because there is already an implementation of most of the tasks, and you probably can't really see whether a ball detection works much better than the one there already is. So yes, I don't know whether I have more to say. So
Thank you, Dr. Ludi Willing and Mr. Arne Selvin for suggestion and knowledge. So now we will close the session. I would like to thank everyone who attended our session. Thank you very much, and see you again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
goodbye.